The vast expanse of space stretched endlessly before the Zenar Imperial flagship. Inevitable conquest, a towering behemoth of technology and power. Its dark, angular form drifted effortlessly through the void, casting a long shadow across the stars. The ship's gleaming exoskeleton reflected the fiery glow of the Gothorx system's twin stars, their crimson and golden light bathing the observation dome in an eerie radiance. Inside, Commander VX Nozari stood before the view screen, his 4 eyes blinking in perfect synchronization, each pair of eyes processing the universe around him with ruthless precision. His exoskeleton shimmered faintly in the dim light of the bridge, a reflection of centuries of military service. The silence was broken by a low, rumbling chuckle that reverberated through the ship, vibrating the air and filling the bridge with the deep timbre of his voice. "Another system falls to the glory of the Zenar Dominion," Commander VX Nozari mused aloud, his voice laced with disdain. "How predictable, how boring!" He turned slowly, his movements calculated, his sharp mandibles clicking with amusement. The bridge was alive with activity. Crew members from countless subjugated species manned their stations, their faces expressionless, trained to serve the Zenar with cold efficiency. Among them stood First Officer Kira Voss, a genetically enhanced Viridian who had once fought to resist the Zenar, but now, after 7 generations of forced genetic modifications, stood loyal to the Empire. Her metallic boots clicked sharply against the obsidian floor as she approached, her posture impeccable, her voice clinical and precise. "Commander," she began, her voice cutting through the air like a blade, "the Dran have surrendered. Their orbital defenses are active, and their governing council awaits your term. Another victory for the Dominion." VX's eyes narrowed as he turned to face her, a dismissive wave of one of his upper limbs punctuating his response. 47 civilizations this cycle, he remarked with a cold sneer. Their weapons barely scratched our shields, yet they fall so quickly. The resistance was almost laughable. The bridge hummed with the ceaseless activity of the crew as they went about their duties, working in harmony with their oppressive masters. The Zenar Dominion had spread its reach across 14 galactic sectors, a sprawling empire that showed no signs of slowing. The Zenar had crushed any resistance that dared to rise against them, their advanced technology and adaptive exoskeletons making them nearly unstoppable. Science Officer Moro Plex, a 6-limbed Tadan with glowing blue scales, approached the commander with a data crystal in hand. The subtle hum of his mechanical limbs filled the air as he moved toward the central holo table, placing the crystal into the ship's data port. "Preliminary scans of the next sector show 17 inhabited systems," Moro Plex reported, his voice calm and methodical. 12 with spacefaring capabilities, but none exceed Zenar classification level 3. VX's mandibles clicked in amusement, his antenna twitching as he turned to face the hollow map of the galaxy, which flickered to life before him. The new sector, designated XJ-271, lay at the edge of known space, isolated and unremarkable. He studied the map for a moment, his eyes narrowing as he considered the next move. "Level 3? Vix murmured to himself, a grin spreading across his face. "Barely out of their gravity wells. It seems we're growing bored of conquest. Let's see what lies in this unremarkable frontier. Plot a course for XJ-271. Perhaps someone there will offer a worthy challenge." The crew moved swiftly to carry out his command. The hum of the ship's massive engines vibrated through the hull as it changed course, heading toward the distant, uncharted spiral galaxy. The tension on the bridge was palpable, and even the long-standing officers couldn't help but feel the flicker of excitement that danced across the commander's thoughts. For centuries, the Zenar had never encountered a species capable of standing against them. They had absorbed countless civilizations, taken their most advanced technologies, and integrated them into their own systems. There had been no resistance, no threat. The Zenar had become the dominant force in the galaxy, a force that crushed all who opposed them. But now, as they approached the edge of the galaxy, something stirred in VX. Something long dormant. The briefest flicker of curiosity. Perhaps, VX thought, someone in XJ-271 will show us a challenge worthy of our time. As the ship continued its journey, the stars began to shift, their light fading as they entered the darker regions of space. The crew, though accustomed to the ever-expanding might of the Zenar, now shared the briefest sense of anticipation. For the first time in what felt like centuries, there was a possibility of something they had never known. A real fight. The Zenar flagship, inevitable conquest, moved gracefully toward the uncharted galaxy XJ-271, its dark, angular form cutting through the void of space. The ship's exoskeleton glimmered faintly in the dim light of the bridge, its reflective surface capturing the fiery glow of the twin stars of the Gothork's system, whose crimson and golden rays bathed the ship in an ethereal, shimmering light. Commander VX Nozari sat upon his ceremonial throne, his powerful form towering over the crew as his 4 eyes blinked in perfect synchronization, each pair scanning the stars outside with cold precision. The hum of the ship's systems resonated softly in the air, filling the space with a calm, predictable rhythm. As the ship cruised through the vastness of space, Commander VX Nozari settled deeper into his seat, his exoskeleton shifting slightly with the movement. The bridge was alive with the activity of the crew, who manned their stations with robotic efficiency. Their faces showed no emotion, their movements cold and calculated, as if the Zenar Dominion's dominance was an unspoken certainty. The ship's massive engines hummed as they carried the flagship further into the unknown, but VX's thoughts were focused on the galaxy ahead, where the XJ-271 sector lay. It was isolated, far from the well-trodden paths of the Zenar's conquered worlds, and yet it beckoned with the promise of something unknown. The bridge's AI, an imposing voice designed to inspire awe, activated, announcing the latest chapter in the Zenar Dominion's unbroken history. The holographic display flickered to life, showing the Zenar's rise to power. One conquest after another. The AI's voice boomed across the bridge, every word saturated with the weight of millennia of dominance. Behold the ascension of the inevitable. After achieving spaceflight, the Zenar encountered the Gorgian Empire. The war lasted 3 cycles, the Gorgian fell, and their technology was absorbed into our exoskeletons. The hologram displayed images of the Zenar warships, sleek, powerful, and unstoppable, engulfing the Gorgian fleet in a furious, fiery clash. The scene shifted to other conquests. The Tian Matriarchy, the Void Dwellers, and countless other civilizations, each succumbing to the Zenar's superior technology and adaptive biology. As the AI narrated their rise, images of their victories played before the bridge, a reminder of the Zenar Dominion's unchallenged might. VX Nozari leaned back in his throne, his mandibles clicking in grim satisfaction as he watched the images unfold. The Zenar had become the galaxy's apex predator, absorbing the best traits of each species they conquered and integrating them into their warships and exoskeletons. The entire galaxy now bowed to the Zenar, and VX was at the helm of this unstoppable force. 47 civilizations, countless technological advancements, VX mused, his voice tinged with pride. No one has dared to challenge us for 300 cycles. The silence that followed was interrupted by the sudden flashing of an alert on the central holotable. Tactical Officer Jens Koto, a stocky Moor Cathy with prismatic sensor arrays where most species had eyes, turned sharply from her console, her expression changing from indifference to concern. "Commander, an anomalous energy signature detected at the edge of the Dran system. It's unlike anything in our records." VX's 4 eyes narrowed. For a moment, there was silence on the bridge as the crew turned their attention toward the new anomaly. The Dran system had recently fallen to the Zenar, and this was the last place VX expected something unfamiliar to arise. His antennae twitched as a flicker of curiosity passed through him. There had been no true challenges for the Zenar in centuries, no resistance worth mentioning. And yet this was something new. He straightened, the weight of his centuries of military service coming to bear. The shift in his posture was subtle, but commanding, and the air seemed to thicken with anticipation. His voice, low and commanding, broke the silence. "Show me," he ordered. Tactical Officer Koto swiftly manipulated the holographic controls, and the central view screen flickered to life. An irregular energy signature appeared on the edge of the Dran system, its intensity pulsing in erratic waves. It was unlike anything VX had seen before. Its pattern did not match any known species or technology. The energy signature seemed almost organic, alive with unpredictable fluctuations. Science Officer Moro Plex, a 6-limbed Tadan with shimmering blue scales, stepped forward to offer his analysis. His many limbs moved in perfect unison, his mechanical joints clicking softly as he adjusted his console. His voice, cool and detached, spoke over the growing tension. "The energy patterns are fluctuating in a way we've never seen before, Commander. There's no matching data in the Zenar archives." VX's curiosity deepened. For the first time in centuries, he felt a pulse of something unfamiliar, something unsettling. A feeling he had long since discarded in favor of cold military discipline. But now, as the anomaly pulsed before him, he could not shake the growing realization that something was happening, something beyond the reach of the Zenar's control. His mandibles clicked in quick succession as he turned to face the science officer. "What is it?" VX asked, his voice tinged with an edge of curiosity and wariness. Moroplex hesitated for a moment before replying, the complexity of the unknown troubling him as well. "It's unknown, Commander. The patterns are too complex. No records match this type of energy, and its source is not on any map we have." VX stared at the flickering display. The energy signature was both strange and compelling, almost calling out to him, daring him to investigate further. He felt a strange impulse surge within him, something not driven by conquest or victory, but by the desire to understand. What could this new force be? And what was its purpose in this part of the galaxy? With a deep, resonant growl, VX gave his next order. "Prepare the ship for full tactical readiness," he commanded, his voice sharpening. "Plot a course toward the anomaly. Set engines to maximum propulsion. Let's see what lies beyond our reach." As the crew worked quickly to carry out his orders, the ship's massive engines roared to life, and the vast Zenar flagship began to change course, moving toward the uncharted sector at full speed. The excitement in the air was palpable now. This was no ordinary mission. The Zenar, the most dominant force in the galaxy, were about to face something they had never encountered before, and VX Nozari, the leader of the Zenar Dominion, could not help but feel the faintest stirrings of uncertainty. For the first time in centuries, he wasn't sure what to expect. But one thing was certain. This would be a challenge worth facing. The screen flickered to life, revealing a sleek, unassuming vessel, the Terran Explorer ship. It looked almost fragile, its design streamlined and organic, contrasting sharply with the imposing, angular warships of the Zenar Dominion. The ship's hull was smooth, lacking the heavy weaponry and imposing defense systems that Commander VX Nozari was so accustomed to. It appeared primitive, almost laughable, compared to the mighty Zenar ships that were built for domination. Commander VX Nozari squinted, narrowing his 4 eyes as he studied the vessel with a mixture of disdain and curiosity. His exoskeleton gleamed in the low light, the intricate patterns on his armor shifting slightly as his focus sharpened. The Terran ship was barely more than a speck in the vast expanse of space. It shouldn't have been here. "What is that?" VX muttered, his voice low and skeptical, his 4 eyes fixed on the screen, every inch of his being reflecting the power of Zenar dominance. There was no reason for such a fragile ship to be in their space. Science Officer Moro Plex, his 6 limbs working in unison, adjusted his console as the data began streaming across his station. His blue scales shimmered faintly, but his expression was unreadable as his many eyes examined the incoming analysis. "Unknown," Moro Plex replied, his voice steady yet tinged with uncertainty. "Preliminary scans show advanced technology, but minimal weapon systems. There is no match in our records." VX's mandibles clicked in contempt as he leaned forward, a sneer crossing his face. "Merchants, perhaps, hoping to trade with the Dran? How amusing." His voice was filled with mockery as he gestured toward the tiny ship on the screen, dismissing it as no threat. First Officer Kira Voss stepped forward, her metallic boots clicking sharply against the polished floor. Her presence was imposing, her enhancements evident in her tall, solid frame. She moved with military precision, calm and collected, as she prepared to hail the Terran vessel. She wasn't surprised by the arrival of this insignificant ship. To her it was just another fleeting distraction. "Hailing them, Commander," Kira Voss said, her fingers dancing across the console, establishing the communication link. VX's eyes narrowed further as he looked at the ship, his impatience growing. He hadn't encountered a species this bold in centuries. His voice, low and commanding, filled the bridge as he ordered the next step. "Let's see what these Terrans have to say." The communication screen flickered, and a face appeared. A human woman. Her features fragile and almost delicate compared to the robust, imposing Zenar officers. She was dressed simply, her uniform plain compared to the gleaming armor of the Zenar. Yet despite her frail appearance, there was a quiet strength in her eyes. Her gaze met VX's, unwavering and calm. "This is Captain Elena Rivera of the Terran exploration vessel Discovery," she said, her voice steady and calm. "We come in peace, and apologize for the intrusion. We were unaware that this system was claimed." VX's eyes glinted with amusement as he exchanged a glance with his officers. He couldn't suppress a laugh. The arrogance of these Terrans, thinking they could speak to him like equals, was laughable. He leaned forward in his throne, his voice dripping with disdain, as he sneered at the tiny human on the screen. "You think to speak to me as equals?" VX asked, his voice thick with scorn. "Your vessel is no match for the might of the Zenar Dominion. Power down your engines and prepare to be boarded. Resistance would be futile." Captain Rivera did not flinch. Her eyes remained steady, her posture unbroken. She did not react to VX's threat with fear or submission, but with an unshakable resolve. There was no trembling, no hesitation, only the calm certainty that she would not back down. It was a contrast to the Zenar's expectation of immediate surrender. This human, this captain, stood before them with the quiet strength that made even the Zenar pause. Captain Elena Rivera, quietly resolute. "We cannot do that," she replied, her voice unwavering. "We come in peace, but we will defend ourselves if necessary." The words hung in the air like a challenge, and VX felt the atmosphere shift. His officers exchanged looks of surprise. The Terran captain was unyielding, standing firm in the face of certain destruction. For the first time in ages, VX Nozari felt something stir within him, something other than the usual certainty of victory. These humans were not afraid. They did not bow, and yet they had entered Zenar space without hesitation, without fear. Was this a mistake? Or was there something more to them than just fragility? VX's voice came low, but there was a flicker of something in it, a recognition of the challenge before him. "Very well," he muttered, the anger in his tone fading into something less certain. "Let's see how much you're willing to defend." With a swift gesture, he turned back to his command station. The Terrans, despite their small size and apparent weakness, had ignited something within him. A curiosity, a desire to understand what kind of force could stand so boldly before the Zenar. The Terran encounter had begun, and for the first time in centuries, VX Nozari felt the uncertainty of what lay ahead. VX's deep, rumbling laugh echoed through the bridge, the sound rich with disdain. The Terran ship, so fragile in comparison to the mighty Zenar warships, was no more than a minor distraction in his eyes. With a flick of his claw, he gave the command to unleash the full might of the Zenar Dominion. "Defend yourselves? Amusing," VX muttered, his voice dripping with mockery. He leaned forward in his throne, a sense of smug superiority filling his chest as he addressed his officers. "Fire all weapons! Show them the might of the Zenar Dominion." The orders were swift and precise, and the immense power of the inevitable conquest surged into action. Massive cannons began to charge, quantum torpedoes were loaded, and graviton lances hummed to life, ready to strike down the Terran ship. It was a show of overwhelming force, one that VX had witnessed countless times. No ship had ever withstood their attack, and this Terran vessel would be no different. The crew, accustomed to the unbroken success of their conquests, moved swiftly and with cold efficiency. But before the weapons could be unleashed, something unprecedented occurred. The fabric of space itself seemed to tear open. A massive energy distortion appeared, a swirling vortex of unstable forces that ripped through the void in front of them. It pulsed with an unnatural force, its shape ever-changing, as though it was some sort of gateway opening into an unknown dimension. From within the chaotic rift, a vessel emerged, a behemoth unlike anything VX had ever seen before. The Terran dreadnought was a colossal warship, its sheer size dwarfing the inevitable conquest itself. Its hull was sleek and smooth, dark as a void, absorbing light rather than reflecting it. Its surface appeared almost alive, shifting and pulsating with an energy that felt foreign to the Zenar. Unlike the sharp, angular warships of the Zenar, this ship seemed to possess a dynamic, flowing structure, as though it could adapt and move with a fluidity that should not have been possible. VX's mandibles clicked in shock, the arrogance that had filled him moments ago now replaced with disbelief. "What is that?" he growled, staring at the screen. The ship on the monitor was not just an exploration vessel, as he had initially assumed. It was a military warship, massive and formidable, brimming with technologies that defied the Zenar's understanding. Tactical Officer Jens Koto, usually unflappable, looked shaken as she reviewed the incoming data. Her prismatic sensors flickered, struggling to make sense of the unfamiliar readings. "Commander, its weapon systems are off the charts, unrecognizable in our records. Energy readings exceed our limits," she reported, her voice quivering with a hint of unease. VX's initial shock quickly morphed into fury. The Terran dreadnought was no ordinary ship. This was a force that had the audacity to challenge the Zenar Dominion. For a moment his mind raced, searching for answers, but only anger surged within him. This was a threat, an unknown and unexpected one, but a threat nonetheless. "Destroy that exploration vessel!" VX roared, his claws gripping the armrests of his throne. "Now!" The crew of the inevitable conquest sprang into action, unleashing the full might of Zenar weaponry. Quantum torpedoes sped through space, graviton lances glowed with deadly intensity, and subspace disruptors were locked onto the Terran ship. The weapons shot toward the Terran dreadnought with terrifying speed, each attack designed to obliterate any normal ship in its path. The very air on the bridge seemed to hum with the power of the Zenar's firepower, a chilling reminder of their supremacy. But as the barrage of attacks reached the Terran ship, something unimaginable happened. The weapons, each designed to tear through enemy ships with the force of 100 suns, disappeared. They simply vanished mid-flight, absorbed by an invisible barrier surrounding the Terran dreadnought. It was as though the energy itself had been sucked into a void, leaving not a trace behind. The dreadnought's shield, a shimmering force field, seemed to absorb the attacks, as if they were nothing more than fleeting gusts of wind. VX's eyes widened in shock and disbelief. "Impossible!" he shouted, his voice cracking with the realization that his forces had failed to inflict any damage on the Terran vessel. His mind raced. How could this be? Nothing in the Zenar Dominion's history had ever survived their weapons. No species, no ship, had ever withstood their power. Yet here was this Terran ship, effortlessly absorbing their finest weapons. The bridge crew fell into stunned silence, each officer processing the event with shock and confusion. VX, his mind struggling to comprehend the situation, snapped back into command mode, fury flashing in his eyes. "Target that ship again! All weapons, fire!" he barked, his voice low but filled with a renewed intensity. Yet even as the crew scrambled to execute the order, the Terran dreadnought remained eerily calm. Its shield, still shimmering with that strange energy, stood unyielding. The Zenar had encountered many species, had absorbed their technologies, had conquered their worlds. But this was something entirely different. The Terran dreadnought had shown them something that defied everything they thought they knew about power. About war. VX clenched his fists, his anger now mixed with something deeper, an uneasy respect for this Terran vessel. For the first time in centuries, the Zenar were facing something that could fight back, something that could outmatch them. Under the cold, calculating gaze of Commander VX Nozari, the inevitable conquest loomed, its vast weapons aimed and primed to destroy the Terran ship. The initial cocky confidence of the Zenar officer twisted into frustration as he continued to watch the Terran dreadnought before him. The words of Admiral Marcus Kane cut through the tension, his voice calm, unwavering. "You've threatened a peaceful Terran vessel. This is an act of war. We will not back down." VX's eyes narrowed. His grip on the armrests of his throne tightened, his exoskeleton clicking in frustration as his once unshakable confidence faltered. He had assumed the Terran ship would fall with ease, crushed under the weight of Zenar might. But instead, here stood a vessel with weapons far beyond their understanding, and tactics that baffled even the most seasoned of Zenar officers. Without hesitation, VX barked orders to his crew, his voice seething with anger. "Focus all weapons on the new threat!" The energy surging through the inevitable conquest could be felt vibrating through the hull, a testament to the Zenar's overwhelming firepower. The massive engines hummed in preparation as quantum torpedoes and graviton lances were locked on the target, ready to devastate the Terran dreadnought. But even as the weapons were unleashed with terrifying precision, something impossible happened. The Terran dreadnought, once a speck on the horizon, suddenly displayed a power that the Zenar had never encountered. It moved with an uncanny fluidity, its defenses reacting with terrifying speed, absorbing or deflecting the oncoming barrage of energy as though it were nothing. The Zenar's most advanced weapons that had obliterated entire civilizations, failed to even scratch the surface of the Terran warship. Science Officer Moro Plex scrambled to analyze the data, his multi-limbed body moving with alarming speed, but his findings only deepened the confusion. "They're hacking our systems," he said, his voice strained, his voice almost shaking. "We can't counter their movements. They're adapting faster than we can react." The words hung in the air like a bitter truth. No one had ever managed to outmaneuver the Zenar so completely, so efficiently. VX's frustration reached its peak. He gripped the sides of his chair, his claws digging into the material as his mandibles clicked sharply in irritation. "Target their propulsion systems! Disable them!" he ordered. But his voice lacked its usual commanding force. It was a desperate attempt to control the situation, but the Terran ship continued to defy him at every turn. It was as if the Terran dreadnought knew exactly how to counter every attack, every move. It outmaneuvered the Zenar fleet, not with brute force, but with a kind of unpredictable brilliance that made it feel like the Zenar were playing a game they didn't understand. The Zenar officers, once filled with unshakable confidence and pride, now exchanged glances filled with doubt. They were no longer the predators of the galaxy. They were the prey. The Terran dreadnought cut through their ranks with precision, rendering their once impressive fleet impotent. The very strategies that had ensured their dominance were now failing them. VX's voice cracked with frustration, his tactical mind desperately trying to regain control of a battle that was slipping through his fingers. "Fire again!" he shouted, but it was no use. The Terran ship continued to evade. Each attack turned aside as if it had already anticipated the Zenar's every move. What had been a swift victory in the minds of the Zenar commanders had turned into a brutal struggle against an enemy that wasn't just surviving, but winning. The Terran dreadnought was more than a ship. It was a symbol of everything the Zenar had not prepared for. Innovation, adaptability, and the ability to turn the tide of battle with a few calculated moves. VX Nozari, for the first time in his life, felt the cold grip of uncertainty. He had never encountered an enemy like this, one that didn't bow to the Zenar's overwhelming strength, one that didn't succumb to their might with fear and submission. Instead, the Terran dreadnought fought with intelligence, and that was something VX and the Zenar Dominion had never faced before. The Zenar flagship, once a vessel of invincibility, now found itself struggling, scrambling, and failing against an enemy whose tactics were as unpredictable as the very space they were fighting in. The Terran response had been swift, tactical, and devastating, something the Zenar could never have anticipated. The battle raged on, and with every passing moment, the Zenar found themselves losing ground. The Terran dreadnought moved with a fluid grace, its advanced defenses absorbing every strike the inevitable conquest threw at it. VX Nozari, once the embodiment of Zenar strength, now found himself struggling to understand. These humans, who had seemed so insignificant, were proving to be something far different. A tactical nightmare. It wasn't just their technology or their power, it was their way of thinking, the way they adapted so quickly, responding to the Zenar's every move. First Officer Kira Voss stepped forward, her tone sharp, but tinged with concern. "Commander, they're targeting our command pilots. We're losing 30% of our fighters." Her voice held the weight of the losses they were suffering, the Zenar fleet crumbling under the relentless and precise attack of the Terran ships. They weren't just fighting. They were outthinking the Zenar, taking out their most valuable assets in one clean, calculated strike after another. VX's anger flared, his mandibles clicking together with frustration. This was more than just a battle. It was a direct challenge to the Zenar Dominion's supremacy. They had never faced such an opponent, one that didn't simply react, but one that thought several steps ahead. It was an affront to everything VX had been trained to believe in. He had to end this. Quickly. The Omega Protocol had always been the Zenar's ultimate weapon, the last resort in the face of an enemy they could not defeat. It had been designed to obliterate entire fleets with a single, devastating strike. With it, VX could wipe out the Terrans in an instant and secure his position as the unchallenged leader of the galaxy. There was no room for hesitation. The Terrans had to be destroyed. With a wave of his claw, he gave the order. "Activate the Omega Protocol," VX commanded, his voice cold and filled with resolve. The crew moved swiftly, the ship's systems powering up with a low, resonant hum as the weapon prepared to unleash its unimaginable force. But as the Zenar flagship readied to strike the final blow, the voice of Captain Elena Rivera came through again, calm and composed, as though she had known what would happen next. "We know what you're planning," she said, her words sharp, but not threatening. "Your Omega Protocol will leave your ship vulnerable. We suggest you reconsider." VX froze, his heart skipping a beat. The words cut through the tension, and for the first time in the battle, doubt crept into his mind. How could the Terrans know about the Omega Protocol? Had they anticipated his move? VX's antenna twitched as his mind raced to process the implications. If the Omega Protocol was activated, it could destroy the Terran fleet, yes, but it would also leave the inevitable conquest exposed. The Zenar flagship, vulnerable. There was no turning back after that. The seconds stretched on, the hum of the Omega Protocol filling the bridge with an almost oppressive weight. VX's claws hovered over the command console, his decision hanging in the balance. Everything he had known, every battle he had won, every victory he had claimed, all seemed to be slipping away. This was no longer a fight for dominance. It was a fight for survival, not just against the Terrans, but against the shattering of everything he had believed about Zenar superiority. The choice was his. The Terrans had laid bare the flaw in his strategy. Complacency. Hubris. VX had underestimated them. And now he faced the consequences. The very weapon that had been designed to ensure his reign was now the very thing that could bring about his downfall. For the first time, VX Nozari hesitated. His voice, when it came, was strained. "Cancel the Omega Protocol," he ordered quietly, his authority faltering. "Stand down all weapons." The crew on the bridge exchanged startled glances. The Zenar commander had made a choice, a decision that would have been unthinkable only hours before. But the battle had changed. The Terran dreadnought had not only survived their attacks, but had outsmarted them. VX's mandate, the very thing that had kept the Zenar Dominion at the top of the galaxy, now felt like a shadow of the past. As the Zenar flagship powered down its weapons, the full weight of the situation settled on VX's shoulders. He had been faced with an enemy that was not just capable, but brilliant. And in that moment, he had been forced to acknowledge the unthinkable, that their dominance was no longer assured. It was a heavy realization, but one that VX would carry with him as the battle shifted once more. The Zenar Dominion was no longer the unchallenged force it once was. And now, the Terrans had made it clear, the galaxy was no longer theirs to command. The months that followed the battle between the Zenar Dominion and the Terran Alliance were filled with unprecedented change. What was once an imposing and unchallenged empire now found itself sitting alongside former adversaries in a newly formed Galactic Cooperative. Commander VX Nozari stood before a council of diverse species that had once been crushed under the boot of Zenar conquest. The Zenar Dominion, once a symbol of overwhelming power, now had to grapple with a new reality, one where cooperation had become the key to survival, not domination. VX's exoskeleton, polished and gleaming, caught the light of the chamber as he addressed the gathered assembly. His posture was dignified, but there was a weight to his presence, one that had been shaped by the defeat he had suffered at the hands of the Terran Alliance. The once unshakable confidence that had come with centuries of military dominance was gone, replaced by the humbling realization that the path they had followed for so long was no longer viable. He spoke slowly, carefully, as though each word carried the full weight of the Zenar Dominion's transformation. "We once believed that strength came from conquest," VX said, his voice measured, yet carrying the conviction of someone who had learned the hardest of lessons. "But our encounter with humanity has proven otherwise. We have learned the power of cooperation and innovation." His words hung in the air, an acknowledgement that the Zenar Dominion had been wrong for so long. Their belief in the superiority of their conquest-driven empire had blinded them to the power of partnership and the boundless potential that came from mutual respect and shared knowledge. The Terrans, with their seemingly humble ships and unpredictable tactics, had shown the Zenar a new way. The room buzzed with quiet agreement as the representatives from other species considered VX's words. The Dran, the Mor Cathi, and even the Xi'an matriarchy, all once subjugated or cautious in their interactions with the Zenar, now found themselves pondering the possibilities of a new future. Standing beside VX, Captain Elena Rivera of the Terran Alliance stepped forward, her presence as commanding as it was unassuming. The contrast between her human form and the towering, intimidating Zenar officers was stark, but in this moment, there was no mistaking the respect she had earned. The power of the Terrans had not come from their size, their weaponry, or their numbers. It had come from innovation, from adaptability, from the ability to work together as a unified force. "The Terran Alliance doesn't seek to conquer," Captain Rivera said, her voice calm but firm, carrying the quiet confidence of a leader who had seen her people rise from the depths of war to the heights of galactic respect. "We seek to partner. Together, we can face challenges far greater than any single species could alone." Her words were simple, but they resonated deeply with every species present in the room. The Zenar, once so quick to dominate, now understood the power of what the Terrans were offering. It was not a vision of subjugation, but of cooperation, of blending strengths and working toward a future where no one species was left behind. The murmurs of agreement spread throughout the chamber as the representatives exchanged looks of contemplation. Even the Zenar officers, who had once held such arrogant beliefs about their superiority, began to realize that there was value in this new path. It was no longer about conquest. It was about progress, and progress could only be achieved when all species contributed their knowledge, their strengths, and their insights. The Zenar had dominated through absorption, taking the best technology and strength from others to fuel their own advancement. But now, they saw that true strength lay not in absorption, but in sharing, in growing together, in growing. As the council chamber buzzed with these new ideas, VX Nozari felt the weight of history settle upon him. His empire, built on fear and conquest, had been replaced by a new vision. A vision where strength was measured not by how much could be taken, but by how much could be shared. He had once thought that the Zenar were the pinnacle of evolution, that their methods were untouchable, but now, standing in this room filled with representatives from across the galaxy, he realized that the Zenar were only one piece of the puzzle. Together, they could build something greater. The council chamber continued to hum with activity, the voices of alien species melding into a single, unified hum. For the first time in his life, VX Nozari didn't feel like the most powerful being in the galaxy. He felt something far more important, the strength that came from working together, from collaborating with those who had once been his enemies. And for the first time, he truly understood the value of the Terran Alliance. The Galactic Cooperative was no longer a dream. It was a reality. And the Zenar had a place in it, not as conquerors, but as partners. VX Nozari stood on the observation deck of the newly commissioned cooperative flagship, staring out into the vastness of space. In the distance, a massive spatial anomaly pulsed and fluctuated, its chaotic form shifting unpredictably. It was a swirling vortex of energy, its edges rippling like the fabric of the universe itself being torn apart. The anomaly was an unknown, an enigma that had emerged on the edges of the galaxy, beckoning the newly formed Galactic Cooperative toward it. The fleet before him, diverse, strong, and united, was no longer the fleet of a single dominating species, but a collective of beings that had once been divided by conflict. Zenar, Terran, and countless others now sailed together into the unknown. VX's mind, once sharp with the arrogance of conquest, was now filled with reflection. The towering, intimidating form of his exoskeleton, a symbol of Zenar strength, now seemed less imposing. The walls of the flagship, which had once been designed to intimidate, now felt like a vessel of peace, a beacon of something new. The Zenar Dominion, with its centuries of unchallenged rule and brutal conquest, had been replaced by this cooperative effort, where no species ruled alone and no one was subjugated. The galaxy was changing, and VX Nozari could feel it deep within him. "Perhaps this is the beginning of something new," he said, his voice filled with a mix of awe and quiet recognition. His four eyes, which had once scanned the galaxy with an unyielding desire for control, now looked out at the horizon with a different understanding. A galaxy united, not by conquest, but by diversity and strength in cooperation. The weight of those words lingered in the air. They weren't just a statement. They were a reflection of everything he had learned from his encounters with humanity. The Terran Alliance had shown him that true strength didn't lie in domination. It lay in the ability to work together, to share knowledge, and to innovate as one. Next to him stood Captain Elena Rivera, her presence a stark contrast to the imposing figure of VX. She had once been the face of the enemy, a symbol of everything the Zenar had sought to destroy. Now she stood beside him, no longer adversaries but partners. Her expression was calm, but there was a glimmer of pride in her eyes. Humanity had come a long way, and now it was leading the charge toward a future where no species stood alone. "Exactly," Captain Rivera said, her voice steady and confident. She looked out at the anomaly as the camera panned across the fleet of ships, a blend of different designs and technologies, each one a unique piece of the puzzle that was the Galactic Cooperative. And humanity will be there to help lead the way. Her words were simple but profound. She wasn't speaking with arrogance, but with the quiet confidence of someone who knew that the future they were building was one of collaboration. not just between species, but between all the forces that had once been at odds. The camera pulled back, revealing the full scope of the fleet. There were sleek Terran vessels, their simple and elegant designs gliding through space. The Zenar warships, now softened by the lessons of cooperation, flew side by side with ships of other species, each unique, each powerful in its own right. The ships were no longer weapons of fear and conquest. They were symbols of unity, each representing a piece of a greater whole. Together, they moved toward the Anomaly, their course set, their mission clear. They were no longer divided by their histories of conflict, but united by their shared purpose to explore the unknown. As the fleet approached the Anomaly, a sense of anticipation filled the air. This was a new beginning, a future forged not in the fires of war, but in the promise of cooperation. VX Nozari, the once mighty commander of the Zenar Dominion, stood at the helm of this new era, side by side with Captain Rivera, knowing that together they were leading the galaxy toward a future of strength, unity, and discovery. The Anomaly ahead held untold mysteries, challenges, and perhaps even dangers, but they faced it together. Not as conquerors and conquered, but as equals. The future was unknown, but it was theirs to shape, united by the strength of cooperation and the power of diversity. And as the fleet advanced, ready to face the unknown, VX Nozari felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: hope.